Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Happy tail end of spooky season this year at the time I'm filming this, and happy Scorpio season. And on that note, if you were not aware, Scorpio is the sign that is associated with the death card in tarot, and so I thought we should do a focus study video on the death card. And I really enjoy doing these videos, so thank you for being here with me for this. And, you know, I'm learning as I talk through this. You know, talking is a great way to learn. And so I have collected all of my cards that are related to death in some way. It is a very meaningful card in tarot, and it has a lot of different sides to it. So I've separated them into 8 major themes that go kind of in a linear order, but you know, not necessarily. But I'm going to move through them in the most organized way that I can. And yeah, if you're here to learn or look at pretty cards or both, I think this should be a pretty entertaining video. So if that sounds good to you, I'm going to get right into it right now. Okay, so I could spend time slowly flipping these over and whatnot, but I figured for the interest of time, let's just lay them out and get right into it, because there's a lot to talk about here, and I tend to ramble, so I'm just going to keep things moving. So the first phase, theme, aspect of the death card that I want to talk about is decomposition, coming apart, the slow fade out of existence, that uncomfortable feeling, you know, that sense of dread. That's what this part is about. I think, you know, people know sometimes if they're sick or just old, they can tell when death is coming, or if you're witnessing someone else slowly losing vitality, you can tell that it's coming. And something that we should get out of the way right away is that death isn't always literal in this sense. If you did not already know, there are many types of deaths you can go through in your life, right, that aren't actually dying. And so I think this caterpillar here is a really good example of that, because the caterpillar dies in the process of becoming a butterfly, you know? It's a metamorphosis. And so change is coming, and that, if I'm being honest, draws on multiple other aspects of the card that I will talk about later on in this video. Obviously there's going to be overlap. It's not like these are neatly divided categories or anything like that. Typically mushrooms are growing out of something that's already died, but I feel like we associate it with rot sometimes, right? When you look at that log slowly falling apart. So while, for example, these corpse binders are associated with being found at the site of a corpse, we're not quite there yet in the process. But I guess I wanted to put them in here because they're kind of like harbingers of death. Like, they have that symbolism there where, you know, there are all these signs before the thing actually happens, and I feel like mushrooms are one of those things. And so that brings me back to the discomfort side of things, where there is this sense of dread and foreboding. That's why Mummy is change in the Halloween Oracle deck, and it's honestly a really fascinating choice. Like, the more you think about it, it's really interesting. And I put it in here because it really speaks to that sense of resistance that we feel a lot of the time when we don't want things to change. You know, there's so many different deaths in our lives, so many periods of change that we go through, and those often are captured in the death card. And that's part of why I wanted to make this video too, is that people get really afraid of the death card. You know, people don't want to see it, but it's not necessarily scary. It can be good in a lot of contexts, especially when you want something to change. We are going to cover all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly. And so this was the first piece, Decomposition. I'm going to move us on to the next phase now. Okay, so moving through that discomfort from decomposition, we arrive at letting go. So this part is all about the release aspect, right? Something is leaving, a part of us is dying, something that's part of our lives is not going to be part of it anymore. You know, you're finishing a job, a degree, a project of some kind. Someone is leaving your life for whatever reason. This part right here is describing the very moment that you give in to that change. And let me actually read the Let Go card here, because I always like to do that when I use these inner child cards. Let go. It is now time to let go of all that no longer serves you. Free the pent-up energy inside of you and imagine it leaving your body as you breathe deeply. Forgive disappointments and pains. Do not allow bitterness in. Let go of control and allow for that which needs to die, so that you may blossom once more. Yes, and that was a good reminder about the control aspect. This part is all about letting go of control, letting yourself pass through that portal, letting the plant slowly die, staring down difficulty and moving through that portal anyway. The red cage here is all about feeling disgust at the thought of death because change makes us uncomfortable, right? And people have a lot of different strong reactions to that. We'll be talking about that, I think, every step of the way here. And, you know, it's really easy to get out of touch with your feelings and you can end up isolated very quickly. And so that's why I threw in Dragon and Wall. These tea leaves seemed relevant because it's really easy to delude yourself into completely denying that something is happening, you know, and then you're not prepared for it, or you don't do certain things with someone or in a situation that, you know, you have limited time and you end up regretting later that you didn't or did do certain things. Yeah, it's really important to trust yourself to be able to handle the situation and that you can like face it head on. Don't put walls up around yourself or your heart or even in your own brain to block out the thing that you don't like, because all it's going to end up happening is you create a cage and it's harder to pass through when you're boxing yourself in like that. And the release needs to happen. It's such an integral part of this. And I think the last part that I'll comment on here is the color orange is very prevalent in a lot of these cards, if you'll see. And that's not a coincidence, I think, because autumn is a time with a lot of orange. This looks like a fall day. And that time is very much associated with death or decay and release. You know, it's the end. We're coming to the end of a cycle. And Samhain is kind of a magical time. For that reason, it always tends to feel like the true, complete end of summer, because I really like to hold on. But that's the point at which it's like, nope, it's cold now. And the plants are dying, and that's okay. So, yep, this one is all about facing reality so that you can move through this change gracefully instead of going kicking and screaming pretty much, or completely unprepared for the change. So that's letting go. Okay, so moving on. This next part I'm calling destruction. And this whole part is like maybe a bit dramatic, but you know, there is that moment where it actually all happens, you know? It's like a supernova or just like explosion. Like we've got some laser beams blowing something up here. Succumbing to poison if we're doing these two. being clawed to shreds is what this panther is about. It's all about clearing out old energy. I should have mentioned as well, this is called an unaliving tree, so I have censored that with a stick of selenite if you were wondering why that was there. But yeah, this is the part where everything blows up. And rock bottom probably could have fit into some other categories here, but I felt that it sort of described the plummet and the drama of all of this. It goes really well with casket, and I feel like it is usually like an isolating kind of event because it's always your personal rock bottom, right? Someone's rock bottom in their life. Or a personal rock bottom during your life is a death. There's so many deaths that we go through over and over again in our lives, and that is so important for understanding the death card because it's not just the final death. It's so many deaths. So, I don't know. I feel like all the kinds of deaths are on my mind here because it's Halloween, that time of year, but also just a time to clear things out in general, starting new cycles, all that good stuff. I also threw in light and shout because, you know, people talk about seeing the light and having your whole life flash before your eyes. And yeah, I thought the shout was like, really went with sort of the bursting energy here and the snarling of the panther as it takes all the stagnant energy out of your life. It's that big moment right as it actually happens. There's all this buildup and there's all this fallout, but there is that one moment of destruction and the clearing truly happens. And I feel like, yeah, casket is dramatic, but it really does hold the dead thing, the debris, I suppose. And a lot of the phases we're going to talk about soon sort of talk about picking up the pieces, so that's where the overlap comes in. The owl was included in the destruction card because they swallow their prey whole and they digest the parts that they need and they spit out the parts that they don't need. And that's some pretty good foreshadowing for the upcoming sections. But yes, destruction, a very poignant moment in time and a critical part of the process. So let's move on to the next piece. So immediately after destruction, we have what I'm calling the Underworld, and this is the liminal space after everything blows up. Death is so profound because it's simultaneously destruction, pause, and creation, birth of new things, all at the same time. That's why, like, I honestly appreciate the death card a lot. I know, again, people are afraid of it or resist it. It is unsettling at times, especially in some decks more than others, but it really doesn't have to be bad. And in this case, this is kind of like a neutral moment because there is that pause at a certain point in the process. And all of these cards kind of talk about that. We have two underworlds, the Ghostlands, Void. I think you get the idea there. You know, there's that idea of eternal rest. We have the dark moon here, or the new moon, and you know, that's sort of the reset of the moon cycle, and it even says on the card, I think, sacred pause, sacred darkness. Yes, pause, rest, reflection, which, yeah, we got rest. Yeah, and talks about void as well. I have reach because, I don't know, it makes me think of like in horror movies when there's sort of just like an ambiguous blob or something of some kind sort of reaching out. It's like nothing is materialized. There's some like vague desires still floating through this like soup, but it's mostly pretty quiet, you know, and it's a temporary situation. I thought tent perfectly described the liminal vibe of what I'm trying to depict here. And this death card I thought was really perfect because this peaceful moment. I guess the whole point of this painting is that there's this tiny little skull right here that has been exposed by the tide pulling back, and yeah, it's this sort of like your consciousness fading away. I thought deeper kind of felt like sort of reflected someone disintegrating and returning to the cosmos. That's sort of the energy I got from that painting. And it goes really well with rest too as well. Rest really feels like it's sort of your soul resting in between reincarnations or something like that, if you believe in that. And yes, I did want to touch on sort of the two sides of this, because it isn't always neutral. People are afraid of the underworld, and I wanted to talk about why I included both the underworld and the void. And this is obviously from the same deck, or maybe not obviously, but these two cards are from the same deck. And they're very similar, but the void reflects more of a resistance to the experience, where in both of them you're in a strange place. It's a very different energy from your baseline. But with void, you're feeling nothingness, whereas with underworld, you're feeling the pause, but you're sensing the potential to return to something maybe even greater and better than before. So some people might see the void and feel intimidated, feel scared, feel sad that that is their fate, or, you know, if they're not going through a literal death, just feeling hopeless about some situation in life. But what you can do is look at it more as the underworld, where it actually can be this generative space. You know, it's that idea of shadow being not bad, like really quite profound, just like an alternate space and time in which we can create things that are really interesting mirror and reflection in our physical lives. It's definitely a very abstract concept to explain, but I definitely want to talk more about shadow and, yeah, the generative possibility of the sacred darkness. But yes, two sides to it. You can see it as an underworld, and see, like, even in this underworld it says where all things pause and begin again. There's that implied beginning. It's not void, nothingness, despair for all eternity. That's it. This is just part of the cycle. I love the like clock imagery here. Actually, it's not a clock. It's astrological cycles, and then I'm not even sure what those runes are actually, but that's funny. It's not a clock, but it's a cyclical pattern in this as well. And obviously, not obviously, this is an allusion to Persephone eating the pomegranate, getting cursed to stay in the underworld, but you know, she makes her journeys out of there as well. It's this process that repeats itself over and over again. So, yes, there are so many parts of this there are so many parts of this that we have to learn to accept, but this liminal space, this pause, this time in the underworld is a critical part of the process, a sacred part. It's just part of the cycle. It has to happen. So let's move on, because we're going to spend a few thematic phases here in sort of a liminal space, but things keep moving. So let's go to the next part. All right, so this next part is such a critical part of the process. We're past the halfway point now, so let's talk about this step, which is what I'm calling alchemizing. So what do we do right after the pause of the underworld? We start to pick up the pieces. We collect the matter that has been dispersed into the universe, or the energy that we've cut ties with, or we have determined to be stagnant, and we pick it up in our hands and we say, okay, I'm going to use this now. You know, lemonade out of lemons kind of thing. That's why I thought this death card was really perfect for this part, because it is sort of reaching out and it has sort of this mold or moss on the bones there, and it's like in the midst of the transformation. That organic matter is being used for something new. And we can find so much more value or meaning in all these different types of deaths if we look at how it can be generative. And that's why I love the alchemist energy in general, because it is a piece of sort of magician energy, which is endless manifestation potential and utilization of resources. So alchemizing, I think, is such an important part of the grieving process, the process of healing from trauma. And it's so hard to get to that point. And that's why, honestly, this isn't a linear process. Like, I'm sort of making it out to be, but it's really not. This is going on like throughout the whole thing, but I just thought it would fit in here. And you know, you might be hearing this and experiencing some resistance, because grieving is really hard, and losing people, losing things or pieces of your life or yourself is really hard, and I'm not trying to downplay that at all. And so in that vein, I think, you know, there are a lot of times when people get judged for their grieving process when it doesn't look logical or what you would expect from someone else. And I think that's really a shame. And that's why I included both of these vultures here, because they embody that energy perfectly. Vultures are so misunderstood. Like, if you think about how people use it to describe humans, it's like someone so quick and eager to scavenge the remains of something, like before the body has even gone cold type of thing. And that's, I know, very morbid, but yeah, I wanted to talk about both sides of that here, because this vulture has depression, anxiety, worry that someone is against you. But the vulture in this deck is actually very much celebrated as a really important part of the ecosystem. You know, they clean up a lot of garbage. They take rotting things that nobody else wants to eat, and they alchemize that stuff. Like, they're ready for that, and it's really hard to process these things. It's really hard to let go, but maybe it helps to think about the infinite possibilities. And so that's why I threw in shifting of the tides in here. It's such a beautiful one. Maybe I'll bring it up top. It is such a pretty wave type of painting. And you know, there's a lot of beauty in metamorphosis. It's kind of perfect that there are butterflies, and we had that caterpillar before, you know. So much relevant imagery. That's what these study sessions are all about, looking at these different patterns. And I have to say that this integration card is probably one of my favorites in this whole deck that it's from, because it literally makes me think of people's energy moving between forms and just all the different ways that vibrations move through our universe. I know some of this is sounding very woo, but it really can be beautiful, and it can be a helpful way to process things and not be in denial and not be turning away and really taking it straight on. Of course, there's the shadow side of the alchemist where you could be too clinical, isn't really the right word, but kind of cold, you know, if you're just thinking about resourcing things and stuff like that. But, you know, I think chances are you're not taking it that far. You might be unsettling people if you are good at making good things come out of a bad situation. But at the end of the day, it's an important skill if you're doing it right. And people need to get better at it a lot of the time, I think, instead of like shoving all of that stagnant energy down that we identified before and just like letting it rot under the surface and then having to deal with it like decades later or something like that. This is taking it on, well, really at any point. It doesn't have to be right away, but it's being ready to be direct and to be curious. You know, there's that playful, curious element of the magician part of the alchemist energy. And, you know, that's why I love the rainbow here and integration, and Skull of Stars is absolutely one of my favorite cards in that deck because it's just so beautiful. Of course, the star in tarot is all about hope, and yeah, the alchemist is really hopeful because they're confident in their abilities. They know that they can take the bad in a situation and make things better. They know that they can move through things with grace because they can alchemize, they can transmute. So important. So the next part is definitely really closely related to this. It kind of makes up this whole liminal middle phase. Let's move on to that now. Okay, so if the underworld was about pausing to figure out what exactly remains, and alchemizing was picking up the pieces that were identified in the underworld, this next phase, creating, is what immediately comes out of what the alchemist creates. It's Phoenix rising energy that like perfectly encapsulates what we're going for here. And I think there is a lot of fire energy. The volcano in this deck is both creation and destruction at the same time, just like death, because is it super freaking chaotic when a volcano explodes? Yes. Eruptions are scary. But what does it also do? It creates new land masses. When the lava hardens, you have a completely different topography than you did before a lot of the time. And I just think that's such a beautiful paradox and goes perfectly with the Phoenix energy. And that's just bringing us into this creating mode here. You know, there's a fire theme in this death card. This is actually death. Even though it doesn't say it, it just has the classic white rose symbol here from the original tarot, which we will look at eventually. But this particular pine tree actually releases its seeds after there has been a fire in a forest, and they're one of the first things that grow back after that destruction, which is amazing. And so this coming to life is a very embodied practice. You know, I think in the alchemizing stage, you take your agency back. You realize it in that you identify the potential and you start to claim it. And in this step, you realize it and you actually bring it into existence and you live it and you do it. You are being that potential and that creative energy. And so both of these cards in the Halloween Oracle deck are really talking about the creative part of death. I thought it was really cool that their death card, obviously skull and moth are very common imagery. The eternal cycle begins here, and Skull of Flowers creating through the ashes, more of that cleansing fire energy from which the phoenix rises. You know, we got both these sets of wings here. So if you can embrace the creative potential that's there and start making that happen, or, you know, if you see the death card in a reading, it's not necessarily about destruction, you know. The whole saying, when one door closes, another one opens. I think we focus so much on things that we wish we could get rid of in our lives, and also things that we are sad that they ended in our lives. And, you know, you can take a lot more agency when you consider that doesn't have to be the entire experience of the death card. It's so easy to focus on destruction when really there's this whole other half. Like, it really is like, I mean, we don't have to quantify it, but it's not like this tiny piece of death. It's a huge part of it. It's a huge part of the process. We wouldn't have anything left on this planet if there wasn't rebirth associated with death. And so if you can embrace that, we have the elephant here. A long journey, either physical or mental, will leave you wiser at the end. This elephant gets it. They understand the level of potential here, and it's a process that will require you to be very embodied, which, you know, can be very vague at times, but is generally a good thing to be. And, you know, at the same time, everything in its own time, right? Which is to say, a really important part of this coming to life card is that you can't rush this process. It happens at its own speed. Like, you can't tell a volcano to hurry up and erupt faster, or to slow down and please not erupt as fast. It does it in the exact amount of time it's going to do it. You know, it has a certain amount of energy, a certain flow of matter throughout space and time, and that's how it shakes out. You can't really change that, you just have to ride the wave. And so you can't rush this process or stave it off. You just have to embrace it, move with it, and that will allow you to be in alignment with the values of creation and in alignment with the flow of energy and in alignment with creating the outcome that you want in a death situation. So I think you get the idea here. This is such a beautiful, sacred part of the process. I feel like I might say that about every part, but it's true. This part is so important. Don't forget it. Death implies creation as well. Let's move on to the next phase. So this next phase is grief. It's written very faintly there, or grieving. And obviously that is present throughout the entire process. So it's hard to put it in any one place, but there are a few things to talk about here. I swear, like, I don't pick these out for the color schemes, but all of this, like, dark purpley, mauve, eggplant color is really interesting because it's not necessarily the first thing you think of when you think of, like, moody or sad, but nonetheless we have it here. And then we also have a lot of orangey reds as well, which I think talks about the passionate side. You know, there's so many different emotions that come out in the grieving process. We have sadness, and I also thought it was important to throw in sacred anger here because that is emotions. That is an emotion that comes up a lot. And, you know, it can be so frustrating when you're disappointed in some way, which is almost inevitable, but I do want to read the disappointment is not the end card. So disappointment is not the end. It is okay to be disappointed. It is okay to make mistakes. We do the best that we can with the knowledge that we have, but not everything will always turn out as we hope. This is a part of life, and though it may feel like the end, it most certainly is not. Do not let disappointments or the fear of disappointment keep you from enjoying your life. Yes. So important. I like that both the sacred anger and these sparkles in disappointment is not the end are kind of like rising, because it is sort of in line with all the other things that came before. There's the shedding, even the shedding of tears, Cookie Cat going out into space. I kind of have to like explain this one separately because you've either seen Steven Universe or you haven't, and so that deck is always going to be funny on here because it's just extra foreign if you both don't know tarot and don't know Steven Universe, it might be a little tricky. I won't spoil it, but I will say, if you end up watching the show, go back to the beginning and experience Cookie Cat again. And it's kind of interesting. There's definitely some foreshadowing, I'll say that much. But essentially the main character is very sad because his favorite ice cream sandwich is discontinued. And there are a lot of tears. But what I think that brings me to, and I don't want to trigger anyone too much talking about food as a coping mechanism, but the character actually leans on eating these ice creams to activate his powers. This is all in the very beginning of the show, so I'm not really spoiling anything here. But I think that's also a good reminder to think about how we're approaching death. Are we being really active like the alchemist and creating things? Or are we being a little bit slower, resisting that process, decaying more slowly, and maybe taking up some less than healthy coping mechanisms to get us through it? And maybe they are healthy, and maybe we need to go slow. It's all about going at the pace that you need to go at, and only you can decide what that is, you know? And so that's why I thought it would be important to throw forgiveness in here, because you have to forgive yourself for how you grieve, you know, or how you move through a difficult change in life. It's never going to be perfect, and no one can dictate exactly what that should look like anyway. So you have to do that. You also have to forgive yourself. You know, there are times when you don't get closure with someone, whether they're just out of your life or they're out of this physical realm. You have to forgive yourself for certain things, or forgive them for certain things. There are so many emotions here, so many big emotions, and this part is all about adjusting them head on, you know? Whether you're cutting cords, I thought that was so interesting that was what scissors are about in this deck. Disappointment in some affair. It makes me think, you know, realizing that you need to snip some cords. I think all of these tea leaf cards are really interesting because some of them are more specific than others. Like we have sorrow over a loss, and then we have just great personal sorrow. And then we have heartache over what you no longer have, and we have disappointment in some affair. So these are more vague, these are more specific. Maybe I should have placed them differently. In fact, I mean, why not just do that? Let's put the vague ones together and the specific ones together, but perhaps that is an important distinction to talk about, because sometimes you're grieving a loss, sometimes you're grieving a gain, or something more neutral. There are so many different deaths and so many different griefs. Anemone is all about grief. I can't even believe how well this like matches, but it just happened to in this blacklight deck. I have a review video for that if you're interested. Seems like the anemone has all kinds of different lore around it, but supposedly they close up right before it's going to rain, and I think that's an important part of talking about grieving, because you can grieve alone and you can grieve in community, and I think both are really important. Like, you can't just completely close yourself off. You can definitely make it a very private process, which can be hard sometimes when you have a lot of people trying to sort of wedge their way in so they can feel better about themselves, like instead of trying to help you. That can be pretty unfortunate. But it's interesting too that this forgiveness is like covered in teardrops, or maybe raindrops, which again, rain, this cleansing, this shedding, tears, cleansing, shedding, it all sort of falls in line there. So I think the important part of grief when we're talking about death is just not judging yourself or anyone else on your grieving process. because that just prolongs the pain. You know, I won't say it messes up the alchemizing process, but it slows it down or it makes it more complicated. And it just creates more unnecessary heartache when you already have a lot of that. And, you know, I think going back to the trust card, I think quite a few phases ago at this point, you have to trust that you will find something else to sustain you. Even though right now you can't possibly imagine how you're going to go on without this person or thing in your life, there is a way forward. There's always a way forward. And so if you can just let yourself feel all of the feelings as you move through, you'll have a much easier time. You don't have to know what the future looks like. You just have to step through that portal. And that's a recurring theme as well. You have to be willing to move through without knowing what's on the other side. And it's a very scary process. And again, you don't have to do it alone. So I'll bring that up again. It can be private, but it can also involve other people. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who want to support you, want to understand if you just open up like a flower. But anyway, let's move on to the last part. It's pretty closely connected to this one. Okay, lovely humans, this is it. This is the grand finale, which I realize it's kind of ironic because death is one big grand finale of at least a phase of your life. But anyway, we're gonna bring it full circle here. Oh my gosh, all of these are like accidental puns. Oh no, oh no. But truly, you know, not that all the teachings have to come from the original Rider Waite Smith imagery, but they are an important teaching tool. So let's talk about everything and everything that's gotten us up to this point. Let's go. First of all, the sun is rising in the death card, right? Perhaps by now you have figured out why I am using this particular backdrop of a sunrise for this video, but I was absolutely with these sunbeams here thinking about the rays of sunlight in this one. So if you saw that coming, congrats. That was absolutely what I was going for. So much to talk about here. You know, there are a lot of themes of light. We have the torch here, but also some moon energy as well. It's not all sun per se. You know, I think this is technically a moon in the dawn. I think maybe it's meant to be ambiguous, and then we have some moons here because there is still a lot of illusion, and I guess that sort of calls back to the liminal space of the underworld and other sections we've gone through, that time in between night and day. That's also what we're talking about, that time when two things are merging, when someone's spirit is reintegrating into the universe, when your consciousness is passing over to the other side. All of that liminal energy, there's both the pause and then there's the dynamic energy as well. It's like all of these things at once. And that's why I think death can be a much more positive card than people give it credit for, because it has so much going on. It has so much going on. So let's talk even more. With all of the wing imagery here, of course we have sort of this triumphant rise, ascension. You know, this is triumph over troubles, obstacles. The dawn is sort of triumph over the night, right? Making it back to the day. And the ascension is this spiritual upgrade to, you know, higher awareness or a less dense energy. And that goes along with torch, spiritual development, enlightenment, awareness, and understanding. If you can embrace death and all of the value and the meaning within it, and all of its generative potential and the beauty of destruction as well, because it is very necessary. Maybe I didn't focus enough on that, honestly. You can gain a lot of spiritual strength and resilience, I think, personally. You know, there's a lot going on here, but you can choose to focus on the sun, or you could choose to focus on the people who have perished. But it's true that once we get to the point of the newness of the death manifesting into something that has been created on the physical plane, the most difficult part of the situation is over. You have birthed either a child or an enterprise or some other idea into the world, and the sense of belonging there is beautiful. I threw that in because I figured it went really well with merge, and it's also sort of calling back to the integration part where, you know, you're not just creating the thing and then moving on so we can forget this entire experience. No, there's a celebration of, look at this new thing that happened. It's not all grief. There's also joy. And I think people find a lot of comfort in remembering that their loved ones who have passed on probably do really want them to be happy and want them to celebrate. And, you know, I think a lot of cultures invoke celebration in the death process. And I think that sort of goes back to forgiveness as well, because sometimes people feel like they don't deserve to be happy anymore, or it depends on the loss, but they can feel guilt over being happy, over moving on or doing new things without the person who is no longer there. Or if the death wasn't literal, but it was something that brings them shame, again, they don't think they deserve to have anything good in their life again. And so that brings it back to forgiveness and trusting that you do deserve it. And yeah, forgiving yourself for anything that happened in the past, and honestly just your self-judgment and your own emotions, because it's not a productive thing. And again, I'm saying this like it's easy, and it's not, but these are all parts of the process. I love that we have two different rainbows here, absolutely fabulous. You know, there's a meteor in this rainbow, which maybe I should have thrown that in. Hold on. Oh my gosh, I should have. Wait a minute. Okay, I'm throwing in two cards here. Two cards. Here we go. Ready? Yay, they fit. Okay, yes. In the Phenomenon deck, we have both rainbow and meteor. And I feel like that was a key part of this hope card, because the meteor is like the star, and the star in tarot is all about hope, of a new dawn, of what comes after the tower moment. And so the rainbow is beautiful. I see it almost as like the combination of sunlight finally breaking through again, and like the tears, the shedding in rain, and how that's cleansing. And when it comes together, you get this rainbow. And not to be a total cheese ball, but I do have a tattoo of that, or at least of the beginning part of that formula. That's so funny. I just thought of that. It was not supposed to be part of the video, but seems relevant. So many puns. I'm so sorry, y'all, but it isn't. But it is not all sunshine and rainbows. I'm so sorry. But the reason I wanted to put this Ascension part next to grief is that, again, we have this potential for illusions with that moon energy. You might think you reached the dawn, but it's actually not, because the moon is all about illusions and things being not what they seem to be. We have to talk about this really serious part with Ascension, where there's this potential for spiritual bypassing, for, again, that denial, that refusing to face what's happening, or just deciding that you're good, you have processed it, even though you haven't. Whether you know that deep down or not, it doesn't really matter. If you know that you haven't, or if you don't know, it's still going to hurt you if you're miscalculating the amount of healing that you've done. And actually, one of the piles in my most recent pick a card reading was all about that. I'll put that in the cards as well. It's a pick a call out pick a card reading. So yeah, that was a really fun video to film. But anyway, that is an important thing to call out because you have to accept all of death, all of these different components, these thematic elements, these feelings, these parts of the process, the destruction, the ashes, the birthing of a new creation, all of it. The night, the day, the overworld, the underworld, the spirit world. It all has a part to play in this process. And I guess spoiler alert for probably one of the next videos on my channel, but I do want to do a video about how using light as like this saving force that is always inherently good in contrast to the night, which is seen as like much more threatening, or the darkness of the underworld, which is seen as much more off-putting. I want to do a video about like why that's not great, and like, I don't know, just open up a conversation about how we can sort of change the language there, because it isn't the best at all. It's like really putting it briefly and mildly, but I don't want to get too far into it now. But yeah, it's just about the totality. All of it is a sacred part of the process. All of it is essential. You know, I mean, you don't have to listen to me, but I think that embracing all of the parts of it can really help you go through the process with less trauma, facing things head on, processing, and coming out on the other side in a stronger place compared to if you shoved it down and then you have less stuff to deal with later. And like, who knows how that bubbles up through your life and festers subconsciously. Who knows how that manifests in your actions. So if you can sort of take that on before it goes that deep, that is a huge advantage versus not looking. And so I feel like a lot of this in the air, in the light energy, you know, these birds have a very clear view of the situation. There's an owl card in this deck as well, and they tend to come out together a lot. And that card is all about perception as well, having clear vision, seeing through the illusions of the moon energy. So I don't know if this is a sun that the eagle is in front of as well, but that's something. It's a lot of circular imagery because it is this process. And so I think, yeah, I also associate death with the world card in a way, because it is sort of that other piece. You know, the world card in tarot can talk about both like finishing up a cycle and coming full circle, but also like being ready to start a new phase of the cycle. It really depends on the context, but I love that it can sort of hold both of those energies at once, and I feel like it's very similar to death in that way, where death is also beginning and ending at the same time. If you've been wondering what this white rose symbol has meant this whole time, sorry I didn't explain it sooner. It is supposed to indicate beauty and purification and immortality. So it also kind of has that infinite Ouroboros energy. If you don't know, that's like a snake eating itself. I don't have any cards with that, but if I did, I would throw that in for sure. I think I'm painting a pretty clear picture here. Death doesn't have to be scary. It is scary. There are many scary parts of it. There are parts that are gross, that are infuriating, heartbreaking. Pretty much every single emotion you can find in here, because there's always going to be that other side, that side that if you embrace it, it can be joyous, it can be profound, it can be heartbreakingly beautiful, you know, deeply moving, and allows for spiritual ascension and growth. And it makes you stronger for when you come across more death in the future. It makes you better at dealing with change. This isn't to put anything negative on mummification at all, but you know, you don't have to be resisting the decay or the change or facing the reality of the situation. You can go into it head on and experience that empowerment piece of it as well. It's like this complete loss of control and letting go, and then it's also taking control in the alchemizing part. And so this is what I mean about how death is just so many different contradicting elements at the same time, and it's beautiful. I think so anyway. I feel like I'm just gonna end up like making the case for why every tarot card is amazing in its own way in due time on this channel. But yeah, and you know, I think Scorpios are misunderstood in a similar way as well. It's like, oh, too intense, but I'm a Scorpio moon, I love Scorpios. We don't put any hate on any signs here on this channel anyway. But I think I've said most of what I wanted to say. These little strings right here on the Ascension card are just like reminding me to say one more time to not rush things. They're sort of making me think of like someone ripping their bandages off or their scabs off, not to be gross too early, or like ripping the IV out and running out of the hospital type of thing. Definitely do not rush. You know, this horse is trotting along step by step. It's not running. It's not digging its heels in. It's trotting along at a steady pace. And I'm sure it stops when it needs to take a break as well, but it's not rushing. That's a really important part. Give yourself grace, give yourself time. You can get through anything. Ask for help if you need it. But remember that with loss, there is always so much to gain. There's always more. It can really help to think about energy moving through the universe, and like you are going to attract something back to you, and maybe you have no idea what it is, you know, like what form it'll come in, but if you trust that it'll be something amazing, I'm sure you will eventually get something amazing, and there are always miracles to be found every day. I hope this wasn't too woo or annoying or anything like that. But yes, I think I will wrap up this video now. I have been rambling for enough time. I will say I would recommend dialectical behavior therapy for anyone who is interested as well. That has helped me a lot with this holding of different realities at the same time type of thought process. This merging of two things that are seemingly just too contradictory to ever come together or exist near each other at the same time. It is possible. So yes, I'll recommend that to help you along if any of this is like giving you a lot of resistance. I hope this was actually a helpful learning exercise. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, what you would like to add, if you think I missed anything important in death. I'm sure I did. Sure I did. There's so many layers to every tarot card to talk about. You could just keep going forever. So please feel free to add to this. Let me know what other cards you might have that you would throw in at any point of the process here. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. So thank you for being here and spending this time with me. I really appreciate your curiosity and you just checking out this channel. Thank you so much. And if you did enjoy this video, please feel free to like and subscribe to this channel for similar content. And I will have links to other videos as well. Otherwise, I think we can wrap this up here. So thanks again, take care, stay safe, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Bye!